The Volanthi hegemony had conquered 17 star systems, and their warships filled the skies of 100 worlds. They were the most powerful force in the known galaxy, and every species feared their name. High Commander Zorath stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the stars pass by on the viewing screen. His crystalline body reflected the light of distant suns, and his four eyes scanned the darkness of space with cold calculation. He had led 1,000 battles and won every single one of them. His species stood 8 feet tall, with exoskeletons harder than the strongest metal known to science. Their claws could tear through steel, and their reflexes were faster than any other creature in the Orion arm. The Volanthi believed themselves to be the ultimate warriors, and the galaxy had given them no reason to think otherwise. "Commander," one of his officers called out, "we have detected a small vessel drifting near the Kepler frontier. It appears to be sending a distress signal." Zorath turned his massive head and felt a spark of interest. A distress signal meant a weak ship with weak creatures inside, and weak creatures meant easy prey. He had heard rumors of a new species called humans, but he had never encountered them before. "What do we know about this vessel?" he asked in his deep, rumbling voice. "It is small, Commander. Our scans show only 12 life forms aboard. They appear to be the species called humans. Soft bodies, no natural armor, no claws or fangs." Zorath made a sound that passed for laughter among his kind. Soft bodies and no natural weapons meant these creatures would fall easily before Volanthi might. He would capture them and learn everything about their species before deciding whether to enslave them or simply destroy them. "Prepare a boarding party," he commanded. 200 warriors should be more than enough to handle 12 soft creatures. The boarding craft detached from the flagship and crossed the void of space toward the drifting human vessel. Inside sat 200 of the finest Volanthi soldiers, with their plasma rifles charged and their blade arms extended. They were eager for combat even though they expected none. The airlock hissed open and the warriors poured into the human ship with weapons raised, and battle cries echoing through the metal corridors. They expected to find cowering creatures begging for mercy. What they found was something else entirely. The first Volanthi through the door took a round straight through his eye. His crystalline skull shattered, and he fell without making a sound. Before his body hit the ground, 3 more warriors dropped beside him. "Contact!" Someone screamed over the communication channel. "They are fighting back." The humans moved through the ship like ghosts. They wore black armor marked with a simple skull symbol and the words, "Orbital Drop Shock Troopers," and they fought with a fury that made no sense to the Volanthi mind. Sergeant Maya Chun led her squad through the corridors of their own ship, and she felt the familiar rush of combat flooding her veins. Her shoulder ached from where she had taken a hit during the initial engine failure, but pain was just information, and information could be ignored. "Martinez, cover the left flank," she ordered through her helmet radio. "Kowalski, get those charges set on the secondary airlock. If they try to bring in reinforcements, I want them breathing vacuum." "Copy that, Sergeant." The Volanthi had numbers on their side, but numbers meant nothing in close quarters against enemies who knew every inch of the terrain. The humans had spent 3 days preparing for this moment, and they had turned their crippled vessel into a death trap. Zorath listened to the screams coming through the communication channel and felt something he had never experienced before. It took him several moments to identify the emotion, and when he did, it shocked him to his core. It was fear. "Report," he demanded. "What is happening over there?" "Commander, they are cutting us apart. We have lost over 100 warriors already. These creatures fight like demons. They do not retreat. They do not surrender. They just keep coming." The battle lasted 9 minutes from start to finish. When the last Volanthi warrior fell, 187 of their kind lay dead on the deck of the human vessel. The remaining 13 had fled back to their shuttle and sealed the airlock behind them. Sergeant Chun stood in the middle of the cargo bay and looked at the bodies scattered around her. A crystalline blade stuck out of her left shoulder where one of the aliens had managed to get close enough to strike. She grabbed the handle with her right hand and pulled it free with a grunt of pain. "Medic!" one of her soldiers called out. "In a minute," Chen replied as she picked up a plasma torch from a nearby workbench. She pressed the flame against her wound and cauterized it herself without making a sound. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, but she did not flinch. She had experienced worse. "Sergeant, are you insane?" Private Rodriguez asked with wide eyes. "Probably," Chun admitted as she picked up her rifle again. "Now someone get me a secure channel. I need to file my mission report before I forget the details." Her squad stared at her with a mixture of horror and admiration. They had all been trained to push through pain, but their sergeant took it to another level entirely. She was not superhuman, but she was something close to it. High Commander Zorath received the survivors back on his flagship and listened to their account with growing disbelief. 12 soft creatures had defeated 200 Volanthi warriors in less than 10 minutes, and their leader had removed a blade from her own body like it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "These humans," he said slowly, "what do we know about their military structure?" "Very little, Commander. But the survivors say their armor bore markings that translated roughly to elite forces. We believe we encountered their finest warriors." Zorath sat in silence for a long moment. If these were the best the humans had to offer, then perhaps future encounters could be managed with greater numbers and better tactics. But something about the battle report troubled him deeply. The humans had not fought like cornered animals. They had fought like predators defending their territory. There was a difference, and it was a difference that kept Zorath awake during the long journey back to hegemony space. He submitted his findings to the Galactic Council with a single recommendation that he repeated 3 times for emphasis. Avoid the species called humans at all costs, because their elite forces are beyond our comprehension, and we do not want to discover what else they might be hiding. The Council read his report and agreed unanimously. Humans would be left alone. What none of them realized, what none of them even thought to ask, was a simple question that would have changed everything. If those soldiers were truly elite forces, why had they been assigned to guard a simple survey vessel on routine patrol duty in a quiet sector of space? The answer was simple but terrifying. Sergeant Chun and her squad were not elite by human standards. They were not special forces or secret operatives or legendary warriors. They were simply the ones who had raised their hands when someone asked for volunteers. They were ordinary soldiers doing an ordinary job, and they had just destroyed 200 of the finest warriors the Volanthi hegemony had ever produced. But the galaxy did not know this yet, and by the time they learned the truth, it would be far too late to prepare for what was coming. 3 galactic cycles passed after the boarding disaster, and the Volanthi hegemony licked its wounds in silence. The Galactic Council had declared human space off limits, and most species were happy to obey. Peace settled over the border regions like a fragile blanket of snow. But peace never lasts forever. Warlord Kasseth was young and hungry and filled with ambition that burned like a star going supernova. He had watched the recordings of the boarding action 1,000 times, and he refused to believe what his eyes showed him. Humans were soft and weak, and they bled when cut. There was nothing special about them except the fear they had somehow planted in Volanthi hearts. "The Council has grown cowardly," he declared to his followers in a secret gathering far from official eyes. "They flee from creatures made of meat and water. They tremble before beings who have no claws and no armor and no natural weapons of any kind." His warriors roared their agreement and raised their weapons high. "I will show the galaxy what Volanthi courage truly means," Kasseth continued. "I will crush these humans and drag their broken bodies before the Council. I will prove that we are still the supreme warriors of the Orion Arm. He gathered 40 warships and filled them with 10,000 of his most loyal soldiers. This was not a raiding party, but a full invasion force designed to overwhelm any resistance through sheer numbers. Even if humans were dangerous, they could not stand against such might. His target was Volcara Station, a mining colony on the edge of contested space. Intelligence reports showed 12,000 civilians living there with minimal military protection. It would be an easy victory and a perfect message to send to the rest of the galaxy. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace and surrounded the station in minutes. Escape pods were destroyed before they could flee, and communication arrays were jammed to block any calls for help. Cassith watched his trap close and smiled with teeth like shattered glass. "Attention creatures of Volcara Station," he broadcast on every frequency. "I am Warlord Cassith of the Volanthi Hegemony. You have 1 hour to surrender, or I will reduce your station to dust. Resist, and you will all die screaming." He expected panic and terror. He expected leaders begging for mercy while civilians wept. He expected the sweet taste of victory without effort. What he received was something else entirely. Station Administrator Margaret Oilerin was 63 years old, with silver hair and arthritis in both knees. She had spent 4 decades working in space as an engineer and manager. She had never held a weapon in combat, and she had never wanted to. But when she heard that alien voice threatening her people, something ancient and fierce woke up inside her chest. She activated the station-wide communication system and spoke 6 words that would echo through history. "They want to fight. Let us oblige." 12,000 civilians began preparing for war. The miners grabbed their plasma cutters and industrial exoskeletons designed for moving heavy ore. These tools could slice through rock and metal. They would work just as well on crystalline aliens. The engineers rigged the ventilation systems with chemical compounds that would burn Volanthi lungs and blind their eyes. They turned the life support systems into weapons and transformed every corridor into a death trap. The teachers gathered all the children and led them to the reinforced core of the station, where they would be safest. Then those same teachers picked up pipes and wrenches and anything else they could find and took positions at the barricades. Old Henrik Johansson was 71 years old and had come to Volcara for a quiet retirement. He was a plumber who had spent 50 years fixing pipes and unclogging drains. His hands shook from arthritis, and his hearing was not what it used to be. When the invasion began, he grabbed his welding torch and walked to a junction point in the eastern sector. He knew he could not run fast enough to escape. He knew he was too old to survive a real battle. So he decided to make his death mean something. "You should hide with the children," his neighbor said, with worry in her voice. "I am too old to hide," Henrik replied with a grim smile. "But I am not too old to make these bastards pay for every step they take." Cassith sent his ground forces through the breached airlocks, expecting easy slaughter. What they found was a nightmare beyond imagination. Every corridor hid humans with improvised weapons. Every ventilation shaft spewed burning chemicals. Every junction held defenders who refused to run, no matter how badly they were outnumbered. "These are not soldiers," a Volanthi officer reported with disbelief. "Our scanners show no military training whatsoever. They are miners and teachers and shopkeepers. Then, why are we taking such heavy casualties?" His commander demanded. "I do not know. They fight like cornered animals, but worse. When one falls, another takes their place. They do not retreat even when they are dying. They just keep fighting." Henrik Johansson held his position for 6 hours. His welding torch ran out of fuel after the first hour, so he switched to a metal pipe. When the pipe bent, he used his fists. When his fist broke, he used his teeth. The Volanthi eventually brought him down, but it took 11 of them to do it, and 4 of those 11 would never fight again. He died with blood on his lips and a smile on his face because he had bought time for the children to stay safe. By the time the human relief fleet arrived, Cassith had lost half his invasion force. 5,000 warriors dead at the hands of civilians. 3 destroyers carrying 200 Marines dropped into the system and tore through the remaining Volante warships like wolves through sheep. The Marine boarding parties swept through the station and cleared every corridor in under an hour. Cassith was captured alive and dragged before Captain Sarah Mitchell for interrogation. He was broken and confused, and his crystalline body trembled with a fear he had never known. Where were they? He demanded. Your elite forces in black armor. The ones who destroyed our boarding party. Where were they hiding? Captain Mitchell stared at him for a long moment before understanding dawned. You mean special forces? She asked with a short laugh. They were not here. This is a mining colony, not a military installation. We did not need special forces. Then who killed my warriors? Cassith whispered. Civilians, Mitchell replied. Miners who had never fired a weapon before yesterday. Engineers who build water treatment plants. Teachers who educate children. A 71-year-old retired plumber held your eastern flank for 6 hours with nothing but a welding torch. She leaned closer, and her voice dropped to a whisper. You brought 10,000 soldiers to conquer helpless civilians, and those civilians killed half of them. Our elite forces are reserved for actual threats. You never even qualified. Cassith had no response. His mind could not process what he was hearing. If ordinary humans could do this, then what could their trained soldiers accomplish? What could their elite forces do if they were ever truly unleashed? The question haunted him for the rest of his short life. News of the siege of Volcara Station spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Every species listened to the recordings and watched the footage. They saw miners fighting with plasma cutters and grandmothers throwing themselves at armored aliens. The message was clear and terrifying. Humans would never surrender. Humans would never stop fighting. Humans would make any enemy pay in blood for every inch of ground. And these were just their civilians. The galaxy shuddered and prayed that it would never have to face what humanity kept in reserve. The Grand Chamber of Nexus Prime was the largest meeting hall ever constructed by any species in the known galaxy. Its ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath the distant dome. Its floor could hold representatives from 100 different civilizations at once. Today, it held only 47 species, but the fear in that room was thick enough to taste. Ambassador Thyres of the Malaga Collective slithered to her position near the center of the chamber. Her species communicated through pulses of bioluminescent light that rippled across their skin. She was normally a calm shade of blue, but today her colors flickered through anxious purples and terrified grays. Elder Koth of the Sithrani Dominion ground his way to his seat with the sound of stones scraping against stone. He was a being of living rock who had watched civilizations rise and fall for 10,000 years. Nothing in the universe had ever frightened him before. Today was different. One by one, the representatives took their positions until the chamber was filled with the most powerful beings in the galaxy. They had gathered to discuss trade agreements and territorial disputes, but everyone knew the real reason they had come. They needed to talk about humans. I call this emergency session to order, announced Council Speaker Vrax, a tall insectoid creature with mandibles that clicked nervously. We have all reviewed the reports from Volcara Station, and we must decide how to respond to this developing situation. Situation was a gentle word for what they had witnessed. The footage from Volcara had spread across every information network in the galaxy. Billions of beings had watched in horror as human civilians tore through trained Volante, warriors with mining tools and kitchen implements. Ambassador Thyres rose and her colors pulsed with urgent intensity. We have completed our analysis of the biometric data from the battle, She communicated through flashes of light. The results are deeply disturbing. She activated a holographic display showing human vital signs during combat. These readings show elevated stress hormones and increased cardiac activity and neurological patterns consistent with extreme terror. Every human who fought at Volcara Station was experiencing genuine fear. She paused to let that information sink in. They were afraid, she continued. Every single one of them, from the youngest adult to the oldest elder. Their bodies were screaming at them to run and hide and save themselves. Then why did they not flee? Asked a representative from the Korvax Unity. That is exactly what makes them so terrifying, Thyras replied, with colors shifting to deep violet. They felt the fear, and they fought anyway. They did not ignore it or suppress it. They transformed it into fuel that made them fight harder. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Elder Koth rose from his seat with a grinding rumble. I have existed for 10,000 years, he said in a voice like distant thunder. I have witnessed empires crumble to dust. I have seen species evolve from primitives to starfarers and then vanish into extinction. I believed I understood how the universe works. His granite eyes swept across the assembled representatives. I was wrong. These humans have broken something fundamental. Fear is supposed to make creatures run away. It is supposed to preserve life, not motivate suicide attacks. What they do should not be possible. There is more, Ambassador Thyras interrupted. We intercepted a historical transmission from their homeworld. They call it a documentary. She activated another holographic display, and an image appeared showing a blue and green planet hanging in the darkness of space. It looked peaceful and beautiful from orbit, but the images that followed were anything but peaceful. This event was designated World War II, Thyras explained. It occurred approximately 400 of their years ago and involved nearly every nation on their planet. The representatives watched in stunned silence as footage played across the screen. They saw humans fighting humans with primitive but devastating weapons. Cities burned and armies clashed, and millions died in ways too horrible to describe. Total casualties from this single conflict, between 70 and 85 million dead, Thyras reported. Gasps and clicks and horrified light pulses filled the chamber. And this was only one of many such wars, Thyras continued. Their recorded history spans approximately 6,000 years, and in all that time, they have never gone more than a few decades without major conflict. They have been killing each other since before they discovered fire. They wage war on their own species? Elder Koth asked with genuine confusion. What possible reason could justify such waste? Territory. Resources, ideology, religion. Sometimes no reason at all, Thyras replied. They are a species that fights constantly, and against all odds they have survived and thrived. Every generation learned from the bloodshed and passed those lessons to the next. A small representative from the Killik swarm clicked its mandibles nervously. The Killiks were known for their brutal efficiency and total lack of mercy. Even they seemed disturbed by what they were witnessing. The soldiers who boarded our lost scouts, the Killik's representative said. The ones in black armor with skull symbols. We assumed they represented the pinnacle of human military capability. Every eye in the chamber turned toward the human ambassador. David Okonkwo had been sitting quietly at the edge of the gathering. He was an unremarkable man with kind eyes and a gentle voice. When he spoke, the entire chamber fell silent. Those soldiers were called orbital drop shock troopers, he said calmly. They are good fighters, and we are proud of their service. But they are not our elite forces. The chamber stirred uneasily. They are not even close to our best, Okonkwo continued. They are what we call standard infantry with some specialized training. Any human who can pass basic physical requirements may apply to join their ranks. Then who are your best? Thyras pulsed with colors cycling through every shade of terror. Okonkwo was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft. We have warriors you will never see unless something goes terribly wrong. They train for years in conditions that would kill most species. They operate in places we never officially acknowledge. They accomplish objectives we never speak about in public. He folded his hands on the table before him. We call them by many names depending on their nation of origin. SEALs and SAS and Spetsnaz and Delta Force. Some of them have no official designation because officially they do not exist. How many of these warriors do you have? Elder Koth demanded. Enough, Okonkwo replied simply. He stood and looked around the chamber at the terrified faces of 47 species. You have seen our volunteers fight. You have watched our civilians defend their homes. You have witnessed our regular soldiers perform their duties. All of this has frightened you, and I understand. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. But everything you have seen so far is humanity holding back. We have not deployed our special forces. We have not activated emergency protocols. We have not even begun to take this conflict seriously. He walked toward the exit and paused at the door. Pray that you never meet the soldiers we actually train for war. Pray that you never give us a reason to send our best. Because if that day ever comes, you will understand why the greatest threat to humanity for 10,000 years was always humanity itself. He left without looking back. 47 species sat in terrified silence and contemplated the nightmare they had just learned about. Somewhere out there were human warriors beyond comprehension, waiting in the shadows for a reason to emerge. The galaxy had never felt smaller or more dangerous than it did at that moment. The Collective Liberation Front believed they were the most dangerous organization in the galaxy. They were a terrorist coalition made up of 6 species united by hatred and fanaticism. They had bases on a dozen worlds and followers in every system. They killed without mercy and died without regret. Their leader was a nightmare given flesh. Vorthan had 4 arms and skin like cracked leather and eyes that burned with endless rage. He had personally executed hundreds of prisoners and ordered the deaths of thousands more. Nothing in the universe frightened him. That was about to change. We have captured a human diplomatic vessel, his lieutenant reported with barely contained excitement. 300 passengers, including ambassadors and their families. This is exactly the leverage we have been seeking. Vorthan smiled with teeth like broken glass. Humans had become famous across the galaxy for their ferocity. Now he would use their own people against them. Transport the prisoners to Rethvora, he commanded. We will issue our demands from a position of absolute strength. The humans will have no choice but to obey. Rethvora was a fortress moon bristling with weapons and crawling with 10,000 armed fighters. Its defenses could repel any fleet, and its underground bunkers could survive orbital bombardment. It was considered completely impenetrable by every military analyst in the known systems. The ransom demand was broadcast across every network in the galaxy. Withdraw all human presence from the outer rim within 30 standard days or watch the hostages die one by one in front of the entire universe. The Galactic Council urged negotiation and patience. They sent diplomats and offered compromises. They begged Earth to consider the lives at stake. They did not understand humans at all. Earth sent 12 operatives. They were not Marines, and they were not ODSTs, and they wore no military insignia of any kind. Their transport was a civilian cargo hauler that appeared on no military registry. When they landed on Rethvora, disguised as a supply delivery, no one noticed their arrival. Lieutenant Sarah Chun stepped off the cargo ramp and breathed the recycled air of the fortress moon. She was 34 years old, with scars from training accidents and eyes that held no warmth. She had spent 15 years becoming what she was, and what she was could not be described in polite terms. 12 targets confirmed, She whispered to her team through encrypted communication implants. 10,000 hostiles between us and the objective. Standard rules of engagement. Understood. 11 voices replied in perfect unison. The first night began at midnight local time. 42 perimeter guards patrolled the outer sections of the fortress. They were veterans of countless battles with senses honed by years of violence. They watched the shadows with weapons ready and absolute confidence in their ability to detect any threat. They never saw death coming. One by one, the sentries vanished. No alarms sounded and no distress calls went out. There were no sounds of struggle and no signs of violence. They simply disappeared, as if the darkness itself had swallowed them whole. Vorthen received the morning report and felt the first cold finger of doubt touch his spine. 42 guards missing? He demanded. How is that possible? We do not know, his security chief admitted. There are no breaches in our perimeter defenses. All sensors show normal readings. It is as if they simply ceased to exist. Find them, Vorthen snarled. Double all patrols and activate every detection system we have. Something is inside our fortress, and I want it found. The second night was worse. At exactly 3 hours past midnight, the main power grid failed. Emergency generators activated automatically, and then exploded one after another in a sequence that could not have been coincidental. The fortress plunged into absolute darkness. Another 100 fighters disappeared that night. Some were found later tied up in storage rooms. They were alive, but they refused to speak about what they had seen. Their eyes were hollow and their bodies trembled at the slightest sound. One survivor kept repeating the same words over and over. They moved like shadows. Shadows with eyes. We could not see them, but we could feel them watching. They were everywhere and nowhere. You cannot fight what you cannot see. Vorthen executed that soldier for cowardice, but the damage was done. Fear was spreading through his army like a disease. His fighters were beginning to shoot into their own shadows. The third night brought the end of everything. Lieutenant Chen led her team through the fortress like ghosts passing through walls. They had memorized every corridor and every guard rotation and every weakness in the enemy defenses. They knew where every camera was and where every sensor failed to cover. They moved faster than eyes could track and struck harder than any living creature should be able to strike. Bodies dropped silently, and blood pooled in darkness that swallowed all sound. Chen found Vorthen in his command center surrounded by his 20 most elite guards. They were armed with the finest weapons the black market could provide, and they were ready to die for their leader. They got their wish. She came through the door like a force of nature with a blade in each hand. Her movements were too fast to follow and too precise to be natural. Guards fell around her, and she did not slow down. She did not even seem to be breathing hard. One guard managed to fire his weapon, but she was already somewhere else. Another tried to call for backup, but his throat opened before he could speak. The last one dropped to his knees and begged for mercy. Chen walked past him without a glance. Mercy was not part of her mission parameters. Vorthen reached for his sidearm and found it already missing from his holster. He looked up to see a human woman standing before him with his own weapon pointed at his face. Her eyes were empty and cold like the void between stars. "The hostages," she said, in voice without emotion. "Location." He told her everything. He would have told her the secrets of the universe if she had asked. There was something in those dead eyes that was worse than any death he could imagine. 72 hours after the operation began, the hostages walked out of Rethvara under their own power. Every single one was unharmed. Every single terrorist inside the fortress was dead. 10,000 fighters eliminated by 12 operatives in 3 days with 0 friendly casualties. The only survivor was a Molliger interrogator who had hidden in a supply closet when the killing started. He gave his testimony to the Galactic Council in colors so faded they were nearly invisible. There was one, he pulsed weakly. Just one woman. She had blades in her hands, and she walked through our command center like we were not even there. She was moving too fast for our eyes to follow. His tentacles curled inward in a gesture of absolute terror. Someone called her Lieutenant. She looked bored. She looked like killing us was just a chore she needed to finish before moving on to something more interesting. He shuddered, and his colors flickered. If that was one of them, and there were 11 more, and they did all this in 3 days, how many more does humanity have? No one in the council chamber had an answer. What happens if they send 100? He continued. 1,000? What happens if humans ever actually try? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Lieutenant Chun and her team vanished back into the shadows they had come from. Their mission was classified at the highest level, and their names were erased from every record. Officially, they had never existed. But the galaxy knew the truth even if no one would speak it aloud. The shadows had teeth, and those teeth belonged to humanity.